my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Light on as I drive on, singing our song. Keep the light on as I drive on, singing our song. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between,
All right, folks, welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris, and I am one half of that, Rich Baris, the People's Pundit. Barnes will join us very shortly. In fact, there he is. So today's show, what are the odds that Biden and his loyal lockdown governors will survive the next coming months? Because in truth, Barnes is here early. Oh, my lordy. All right. In truth, and I think, I'll bring Robert on now. I didn't expect Biden to get into trouble as quickly as he has gotten into trouble, along with his allies. And I think there are some things going on. But let's bring Robert in, get his take on it. Robert, can you hear me, my friend? How you doing?
Hey, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. So
The
go ahead.
extraordinarily,
Give us your thoughts on this.
I discovered something today. It turns out that Congress does indeed have the power to recount the votes even after a federal election has been certified by the state. Speaker of the House Pelosi made that clear today that they're going to recount the votes from the Iowa congressional district that's contested, and they might change the election from what the state certified. She said, we're the House. We have the right to recount the votes. That's funny. I thought that was a crazy, kooky conspiracy theory a couple of months ago.
Robert, it never ends. And then out in California, you have Gavin Newsom. They just, there's an article right now, just came out maybe an hour before we came on. And it's like, we have a plan. And the plan is twofold. Smear the recall effort as a partisan Republican recall effort, which you have to admit they have no choice but to do, right? So that they have no choice but to do that. But that really the crux of their plan is to strike as many signatures as they possibly can with what they're calling aggressive signature verification. Man, it doesn't get...
it's just open, flagrant out there. All the signature checking that they said, less than 1/10% of signatures will be invalid. Now all of a sudden they're expecting they're going to try to do 100 times that many of signatures they're going to try to strike in the recall petition, and that the Congress can actually challenge and contest a federal election even after it's been certified by a state. And the press, is completely silent on both of these. Not saying a thing about it. Time bragged about their fortifying the election, and now they're turning around and staying quiet when their hypocrisy is being completely exposed.
Yep. Phil Kerpen, he put it well today. The fact of the matter is, this is what we found in our investigation. This was a cabal, a corporate, a media, a political cabal that changed our elections, changed the rules, changed longstanding policies. The media was a major driver in this. And The Hill actually today reporting on the poll that Emerson put out. Our buddy Spencer at Emerson College, he put out a poll for, I don't know the name of the media outlet. I've never heard of them, to be honest. But, I'm not a California guy either. So maybe they're out there in the West. It says they're California media companies, so that would explain it. But here, I can show it. Let's put it up. Here we go. Here is the poll. Regardless of the recall effort, would you vote to re-elect Governor Newsom in 2022, or do you think it's time for someone new? 41.7% say they would vote to re-elect him, and 58.3% say it's time for someone new. And it's worth noting, Robert, that the recall effort's tighter. I believe it's like 2 points or 4 points separated by very, very tight, which we would expect that. We would absolutely expect that.
If Newsom couldn't win a straight up re-election, so he needs, as that poll shows, so he needs a way to make it Democrats or Republicans in the state of California. He needs to make that the issue in the recall because, as the poll shows, about 60% of the state doesn't want him around anymore. And the only way he's going to hold on is if he gets about 20% of those people who don't want him to choose him rather than the alternative. And that's why whoever the alternative is and how those alternatives stack up is going to be critical. But I think he's probably facing the same problem that Whitmer and Cuomo are facing, which we previewed on this show last week. Last week said that to look for additional people to become caught up in the scandals related to the nursing home issues or other scandals related to lockdowns, not because of the bad of what acts that they took, but which are clearly are the case, but because they're seen as potential threats to the current vice president, Kamala Harris. And, the next day, the story dropped on about Whitmer. Now we can see Newsom. Well, the only thing where Newsom's real risk is that Harris helps coordinate behind the scenes to make sure the recall petition is approved and to make sure that he does not have the best, that even if he were to somehow survive, he comes out very, very wounded to where nobody thinks of him as a presidential candidate. I think she would really like him to just lose, flat out lose. But ideally, at least be wounded. And that's why, we predicted it and it showed up very quickly. And it's why it's going to continue to mount. That's why Whitmer is going to be in more trouble. That's why Newsom's going to continue to be in trouble. That's why Cuomo is on his last legs. We said he was a walking corpse. He just didn't know it yet. And that's clearly the case. While Evers and Wolf are probably not going to ever get into trouble, despite them doing similar illicit activities, because neither one of them has national ambitions.
Yeah, and, Whitmer may be smarter than I think most people give her credit for, because she came out and threw Cuomo right under the bus, man, with the sexual assault stuff. Now, the nursing home she's mute on because she can't say anything about it, right? But immediately she's like, look, these allegations, I think we have to really look into it. That's a signal like, listen, don't worry about me. I'm going to be good. I'll play ball. I'm good with you on this. And I have a clip from Cuomo that I want to play, because this is his. We've said this before, and it's 100% true. The Cuomos are brawlers, man. They're brawlers. And the FBI, the Attorney General of the state, he's got a lot of problems right now. Basically, that nursing home story, for people who don't know, is a lot more than grandma and grandpa being killed. Apparently, the FBI is looking into whether or not he did that for a donor, really. That's whether or not that this policy helped their lobby, and
it's what we talked about back at the time, because I had clients who wanted to sue these various states, and New York was the most egregious. They made big donations. Cuomo turned around and gave them complete immunity, made it an executive order so their compliance with it couldn't be the basis of a suit anyway, created a perfect circle of immunity that involved some of his biggest donors. And he has a history of this in New York.
Yeah, he really does. And that's New York politics too. Sadly, it's just true, but I took the time to read some of these sexual assault allegations today and earlier today, because I've read some as they can. I've read what's her face's Medium post back in February. Forgive me for not remembering your name.
Great start.
Probably would drive. Yeah, it's great, right?
That's one of the best starts to a sexual harassment story I've read. Let's play strip
Robert,
poker.
It sounded very credible to me, and I'm not a big believer. Look, she's running for office, so as Cuomo first starts out with his usual condescending nonsense in this interview. I'm not going to speculate on motivations, but people have ambition. That's what you just speculated. Yeah, and what he's talking about her and others specifically. She is running for office. However, what strikes me with these women, and what's different from definitely some of the Trump allegations, but even the allegations against even Democrats in the past, these are women who really, a lot of them were professional women, right? And there's a pattern, Robert. It's a pattern. It's a pattern. And the pattern makes sense. It works with his psychology, it does. Whereas some of these sexual assaults against, again, both Republicans and Democrats, some of these accusations just didn't fit the profile, right, at all, and they just were, I don't know, incoherent. They were way outside of believable.
And Cuomo was on tape. That whole sausage thing, it's clear his behavior fits a pattern.
It is, and it's his brother. Honestly, his brother's much the same way. It's who they are, and again, people knew this about them. So some things do bother me when I read some of them. One, as if some of these women expected any different. Right? You can even see some of them are like, I didn't go into this eyes wide open, yet you got 3 or 4 warnings from people. Watch out for Cuomo. He's a filthy creeper, right? So how could you not know what you're walking into? The truth is, you took a risk because you have ambition, and I'm not saying that excuses his behavior, but I am saying that they did know what they were getting into with this old creepy man. Come on.
We always say sexual harassment is power. And the accusation of sexual harassment is also power. And so that's the nature of it. And so if you're a woman in that position, that walking into it, you can either go all the way Kamala and benefit from it that way, or you could use it against them and have power that way. So I think it's Disclosure, the Michael Crichton book, turned into a movie, if I recall the right title of it. I think is it Michael Douglas? No, it's someone else, I think. But it's good with
It is Michael Douglas, isn't it?
I think it's Michael Douglas.
I thought it was too. I could be wrong, but if somebody,
and Demi Moore before, exactly. I think Demi Moore is the other. But the genius of his book is he's talking about how sexual harassment is really all about power. Same with David Mamet's play. I think that was made into a movie at some point. Oleana does a really great job of it. It's like both the bad. Everything around sexual harassment, either way, is about power, and that power doesn't go one way. If you're a smart woman, you know how to use that power to your advantage in multiple ways. So because you now have the accusation, you now have the material, and I think some of the people that were approached. Now I say some because you watch that videotape of how he reacted to that journalist. I don't know. I mean, she's trying to, back out of it. She's trying to decelerate it. She's trying to redirect it. And she's in a difficult position because here's the governor. What does she really do? Does she offend him in front of everybody? Does she make a storm? I mean, she's like a professional woman who's stuck in a bad situation trying to manage it. And it shows how overt and arrogant he is. And by the way, he does that with his daughter sitting next to him. The guy's a bottom barrel scumbag. I mean, I don't even think Bill Clinton would go that low.
I was just did you see the part of her accusation where he walks her, for people who don't know this, for this one, it's the one I'm talking about. There's many now, and they have all a lot of common threads, which is, I'm a scumbag. Like Robert said, it's about power. It is. And the extent, like how far he went, really was dictated by, like you're saying, it is about power. And when you make these comments that he was making, that they say he makes, by the reaction you get from the woman, whether or not you can stick your hand up her blouse or under her dress, which is, what some of them say. Because if you're not thorough, or if you're not visibly embarrassed or angry, then you're gonna, it's not an invitation. I'm just saying a person like Cuomo will take it as an indication that, yes, he will continue to escalate until his hand ends up under your clothing. That's how these scumbags work. And this one, they took her, no cameras, underground passage, secret passageway, to his office. There's a room with historical stuff in it, multiple doors. He winds up coming through, pretending like he's Bruce Wayne through one of these doors, right? And then he goes around the whole room and he's showing her all these different things. And what is the box he stops and comments on the most? A cigar box, a gift from Bill Clinton, where he makes a comment about a box about cigars, right? It was a reference to Monica Lewinsky. That was his way of testing her to see whether or not she would, how she would react. That, to me, I got to tell you, that smells like Andrew Cuomo all day. It does. It really, I can't really, there's no defense. I get what he's saying. People have ambitions and there are reasons, but the truth is people like him have just been allowed to behave like this for so long that now he's going to act like the victim, because he's like, what do you mean? Nothing's been wrong with my behavior from years. Because nobody ever called you out on it. And now he's going to play the outsider. After Robert and I last week detailed decades of this family in New York politics, a permanent fixture in Albany, okay? And they're going to play this. Let's just play this clip, Robert. This is just too much. It's just too much. Hold on.
I'm not going to resign. I was not elected by the politicians. I was elected by the people. Part of this is that I am not part of the political club. And you know what? I'm proud of it.
He's not part of the political club. In the beginning, he starts off sounding like Vince Vaughn from Fred Claus. I wasn't elected by the politicians. I was elected by the people. People helping people, baby. Come on, get your action. I'll take your action over here. Forget about the Salvation Army. People helping people. Come on, what are you talking about? You don't know people helping people. It's a condescending, arrogant prick. There's no other word for it. He's just an arrogant, condescending little prick. And that's who he's been. And the idea that he's not in the political establishment, Robert, is this for real, man?
Yeah. I mean, it's what he means is he's not in Kamala Harris's favored political establishment right now. Because otherwise, but he's walking dead. I just don't see him surviving. Once Schumer came out, everybody's just piling on. Yeah. Everybody figures it out. And then, Posobiec made clear what we had already been predicting to everybody, that this was all backed by Kamala Harris. And that's why it's and I think she allowed that to get leaked to let everybody know this guy's got to go. That's what I see this is about. And then, a day or two later, the Whitmer story drops about her problems with nursing home issues suddenly. And liberal Democratic state, Wayne County DA, people like that are saying they're going to investigate. That means the prosecutorial process is aligned against these individuals. And that's where, those individuals, I believe, are aligned with the Harris wing, what people don't realize is,
definitely.
Harris was the deep state favored candidate in 2020.
From the jump.
Yes, that's why Tulsi Gabbard focused on her. Was Tulsi understood who she was and wanted to take her out, and did take her out in terms of elective power, but then she got her way back in through the VP position by helping taking out Whitmer from being nominated in the first place. Managed to get around the fact that all of Biden's loyalists were like, she's a snake. You can't have her anywhere near you, including Dodd and some other people. It was interesting that, the other thing is she knows all that some people might interpret the Cuomo story also as a subtle shot at Joe, at Biden himself, because Biden has done almost the identical kind of behavior.
It's the same thing. Absolutely. Robert,
and she's
that's
just
that
letting
era.
everybody know. I mean, it's been a little covered story in the press, but almost all the calls with foreign leaders are being done by her, not being done by Biden, which is extremely rare. And then you have on top of that, the fact that Biden, they're scared to let him take a press conference. Still no press conference. How long can they play that game, especially as the pandemic fades? Then you had that speech. That was like Jimmy Carter's Malaise speech. Don't worry. By July 4th, you can have 4 people in your backyard. It's like, well, what kind of speech is this? And I get, Orange Man bad. The pandemic is the only reason Biden ever won. The only reason why he got nominated. The only reason why he could win. The only reason. So he keeps
regular
playing.
election. He goes down, Robert, and he goes down bad.
Song. Over and over. Pandemic, Orange Man bad. Pandemic, Orange Man bad. The problem is it's running out of gas. And he's already, even the media's own polls, NPR, Marist, Monmouth, the Quinnipiac, has him under 50% approval rating. And that's a problem. You dig into the data. Basically, he hasn't changed here's what's happened. One, he's never got any headway into the Trump support at all. He's got, the let's take the national popular vote at face value. Which one can question, but taking it at face value, he's basically been at really +4. That's if you really dig into the numbers, because it's 5 or 6% of Trump voters that approve of him, 5%, 6% of Biden voters that disapprove of him. So it's been about even. The problem is there's been slippage over the first 2 months, and that slippage has it. So he had made he blew his chance to make any headways into any Trump supporters by doing, say, infrastructure or minimum wage or getting away from the January 6th events or stopping impeachment.
Even that alone, Robert, would have went a long way. If he would have just said, listen, I don't want the beginning of my administration to be focused on punishing my predecessor. If he would have just said that alone, he could have taken 6-8% off the Republican top, just for respect, just for out of respect, the respect vote.
He would have got double digits of Trump voters approving of him, at least for the time being. And then if he would have focused
temporarily, but still,
not these big bailouts of city governments and county governments and state governments and pension funds and government employees and just, big, cash cow for all of these Democratic lockdown politicians. If instead he would have focused solely on a straight up check to taxpayers with no limits, no strings, no restrictions of the $2,000 that he promised he would give, if he would have got that through quickly, added a major infrastructure plan that people could see as having a jobs component, particularly given what he's doing on the pipeline and the rest, which he could have just avoided doing in the first place. But put it on Congress to pass something, and then it'll take 6 months. And then pass a minimum wage increase, maybe not quite something like what Florida did. In other words, what Florida passed, because whatever people's feelings about or beliefs about the minimum wage, as the Florida vote showed, the minimum wage a $50 minimum wage passed by 20 points. It's just very popular. So if you want to get into that working class Trump base, that would have been the trifecta to do so. He did none of those things, so he's made no inroads there at all. And then the problem he has is the working class Democratic base. 3 groups, African Americans, Latinos, and millennials, are showing really low levels of approval of Biden compared to they're the group that he's not. He's the Democrats unhappy and unsatisfied around a lot of some of those same issues. minimum wage issues, not getting the $2,000, seeing a bunch of money go to Wall Street, go to bombs, things like that. Doing the Syria thing was a real bad idea early on for the anti-war portion of the Democratic base, particularly when you're not sending out checks that you promised, when you decided to stiff them. And, you can't say $2,000 and then do $1,400 out of the gate while you give money to everybody else. So now there's problems economically with these policies, but putting that aside, from a pure political perspective, short-term political perspective, he has blown his opportunity to, and so he's trying to go back to the Orange Man Bad pandemic script because it's all he's got at the moment.
That's it.
And like his approval rate amongst millennials is just over 50%. That's a huge problem. His approval amongst African Americans is in the 70s. That needs to be in the mid 80s. His approval amongst Latinos is under 50. I mean, that's bad. I mean, you're talking about groups.
The Latino vote, Robert, is something that I see it everywhere, and now we're not the only ones. When we ran that California poll, I got a lot of snarky blue checks, in the replies, like, there's no way Newsom's at 38% with Hispanics. Okay. Look at Emerson today. Look at Emerson. And it is possible, even in places like California, which is, by the way, you said take the national vote at face value. The national vote, his +4, out of, about 5 million came from California. Alone.
Yes.
Alone. I mean, people have to understand. Incredible.
It's what we previewed before the election. Said that, my vote count was around 75 million for Trump, hit almost exactly the number. And then I thought Biden would be around 75, 76, but the X factor was California. I said if he gets a whole bunch of extra votes out of California, given the math, there were no rules. And that's what happened. I mean, he got a ridiculous surge of votes out of almost all of that excess vote.
Late surge too. Yes. And Robert, after Donald Trump did for a Republican candidate in Los Angeles,
dramatically. I mean, he got tons of more votes out of California, which I mean, they really dug up, kind of literally dug up the votes.
They did. I mean, and we could look at the voter file, and we should do that one episode.
Yeah,
it is as everybody who knows and watches our shows know. It is not possible to come near 85-90% turnout. It's just, that's not possible in the United States of America to legitimately do that, because so much in a state like California is dirty. So in that state, they don't maintain their rolls at all. I mean, there are movers on the voter file for like a decade or more. I mean, there are some really old records, actually 17. I saw the other day, it's 2003, that COA was put in 2003. And for 17 years, that record's still been on the voter file in California. So, I mean, and there's so many of those, it's not even funny. And then typically, it's disproportionate, but because it's even worse, and that's clear across the board. I'm talking about any state, it's disproportionately, dirty in blue areas. That's just not because of population, it's disproportionate. And in LA's 20+% of the vote, at least. And now it's like 33 or 36% of the dirty rolls. So that's disproportionate. Same thing with Clark County is even worse. We've talked about this before. Clark is 7 in 10 votes. It's 85% of the dirty rolls in Nevada. So, and by the way, when you look at that poll in California, it jumps not only the Hispanics, because Emerson found it too. Same thing in New York. Trump's vote in Kings County was incredible, frankly. I couldn't believe he got that many votes out of Kings, But when you look at that poll in California, the recall vote is closer. And I think that's because Republicans haven't put forward a viable alternative. So somebody like we talked about a couple of months ago, or somebody I spoke on the phone with last week, who's mulling running. So if there was a name, Robert, not a partisan, because it has to be, now the way Newsom is going, it has to be somebody who's not really seen as a partisan Republican. It would have to be. And
it really, it need to be an independent, or what I told people is the best chance of winning would be an anti-lockdown Democrat that would had a big name,
or a socially liberal, fiscally conservative, but not painted as. Well, and they could try, because they will. But
an Asian American independent with that would be good, or a Latino independent.
Or an Asian who speaks Hispanic and who could cut Hispanic ads. You know
Someone
I'm talking about you if you're watching the show.
Exactly. I mean, there's several people that have the ones that have run before are not going to make it. So I think they're kind of wasting.
John Cox's.
Yeah, correct. I think they're just wasting time at this point. Now, and there I know there's a bunch of celebrities sort of circling it. Now, the ex what's his name? I always blank on his name. The guy that's one of the big Facebook guys that left Facebook, now hates social media, billionaire tech hedge fund guys.
He's not Thiel, not Peter Thiel.
First name starts with CH. I think it's an Indian name, but I have no way I can.
He's buddies with Mark still, Peter, even though he's not left wing, but.
Right, no, but someone like that could take out Newsom and doesn't necessarily have national ambitions. There's somebody, but doesn't appear to. Peter Thiel thought of it back in the day. It appears he's dropping out of politics for a while. It looks like, at least. Now Grinnell may run. I know there's a lot of people that like Grinnell. I still have doubts.
That's my gripe. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, Grinnell is part of the reason why Julian Assange is in prison. So I'm not, Grinnell used to be a neocon until he jumped on the Trump bandwagon. He was only excluded from the Romney group because he was gay, not because his politics excluded him. I think he's been a smart Trump loyalist, but I don't think he's at heart loyal to Trumpism. Now, he'd probably be a pretty decent governor, though. But I just don't think anybody that's actually Republican, seen as a Republican, can win in California. Yeah. I just think that's a long. This is not Arnold Schwarzenegger 2003. That ship has sailed. An independent could win. If Republicans were smart, they wouldn't field anybody, or they would back an independent that's particularly anti-lockdown, because that's what matters the most at a gubernatorial level at this stage. You're not going to get
politics are local. Tip O'Neill was right when it comes to gubernatorial elections. Tip O'Neill was dead on.
Tulsi Gabbard type. She's not in California, but a Tulsi Gabbard type could win. It could take out Newsom. Somebody that Democrats feel comfortable with voting for, because that 20% of the Democrats that don't like Newsom, disproportionately working class voters, are not going to trust a corporate style Republican. It's just not going to happen. We saw that in 2018, Robert. I mean, Newsom wasn't a strong candidate in 2018.
No. You know that. I know that. I think a Republican, somebody with an R after their name, if it was the right candidate, could win. But somebody like a Rick Grinnell, and everything I hear about him, he's a good guy. But I'm not. This is nothing personal. It's a fact that he would be, like you said, he has the history that's before the pre-Trump history, which is horrible in California. And then he has the history of working with Trump, who's toxic in a lot of areas of California. I just see a double whammy there. It's just not gonna stick. I mean, I know a lot of Trumpers love Rick. I get that. I'm just saying he'll be painted with both brushes.
He does not have a realistic shot. You could raise funds, but
he'd raise money.
Find an anti-lockdown Democrat or an independent. I mean, I think California would be happily right now. I think they would happily vote for an independent, someone that just says, "Hey, I'm not either party." I think partisan politics is our problem. I think we politicize these pandemic politics. We need our schools open. We need our businesses open. We need to not have hypocrites and frauds running our state. I think that kind of message would get a lot of the Republican vote once they realize their only shot was that independent, and keep a good amount of the Democratic dissident vote that doesn't like Newsom, which is what is interesting is what's showing up in California, what's showing up in these Biden polls is that it's not what happened in 2020 with Trump working class inroads into African-American Latino communities is not a one-off. It's continuing.
Not going away. That's it.
And then the Asian American middle, the only portion of Democrats are keeping satisfied is their white professional class base. And I would say to a large degree, all of their professional class base except Asian Americans. There's problems there because of critical race theory and race discrimination policies. Where we start, like, to my surprise, Trump made inroads into Asian American voting groups, particularly in California. It varied into other places, but that suggests, but what is this? Vietnamese, Cambodian, that have working class roots, even if they're middle or upper middle class now, are not real thrilled with this, that they're seeing that they are going to be the losers more than anyone else in the critical race theory, reparations-driven, other policies, particularly in employment and education. They're the ones who are going to get discriminated against more than anybody else, solely because they're Asian American, as the Harvard case confirmed. And so I think, but we're still, the fact that Biden is still underwater with those groups means that the groups that Trump made inroads, the realignment continues. The realignment, and the only thing Democrats had going for them was millennials, and they've lost them within 2 months of holding power because they didn't understand that this group doesn't like war. They didn't understand that this group really likes the economic redistributive left version of populism. So they like checks. They love those stimmies, and they like free rent. They like a minimum wage higher. If I got to work, baby, if I got to work at Starbucks, I'm getting $15 an hour. By golly, if I got to give that latte to that little Karen walking in here, that's who these kids are. That they're much more on the popular. They're more populist in certain respects than Bernie is on that. And there's reasons to be critical of some of their mindset. The externalization of blame, we can transition down the road into some of the issues related to the trial that's taking place, or the Meghan Markle interview, both of which show a common problem in the millennial generation of not internalizing loci of control. It's one of the key things that we used when we're surveying jurors. You find out very quickly that whether they have an internal or external loci of control matters. Yeah. Now, when I was picking that jury to sue Wells Fargo, I wanted people with external loci of control. That's right. The man is out to screw you. The man is out to shaft you. And that was a beautiful jury. Not for the bank, but so, we have to understand these different constructs. But I don't think Biden's team understands it. They all are these professional class kids. They're either holdovers from the Obama administration, the neoliberal elites, like Yellen, like the secretary, like Blinken. That crowd still running off the same script as if it's 2011 all over again. We're going to, fight with Russia. We're going to replace the government in Venezuela. Maybe we'll replace the government in Bolivia. That's the part where some of the right was saying, Biden administration, pro-socialist, et cetera. Not really. This is a neoliberal Wall Street. This is more fascism than it is socialism.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a different breed of fascism from what we saw in the 20th century. I think it's more dangerous because it's more like a hive mind. So you don't have to use government power to force corporations, to force cultural institutions like academia and entertainment and media. You don't have to force them because everybody's a hive mind. And the minute, and that's what explains cancel culture too. In a large part, it explains it because the minute somebody breaks off from the hive mind, the hive knows, and it's like alert, destroy, alert, destroy. We have a loose node in the hive. Go get right. When soldier has gone off the reservation, destroy and return to the hive. I mean, this is what they do. That's how they behave.
The state leverages corporate power to do what it wants.
That's right.
This is the neoliberal equivalent of the Bush neoconservatism, and neoliberalism has a lot of support on Wall Street. Neoliberalism has a lot of support in big tech. Neoliberalism has a lot of support within the defense industry, but particularly the deep state.
Yes.
And that's why it's like when people were telling me on the right, Biden is going to back up certain areas, and that he wouldn't try to continue to do a coup in Venezuela, that he wouldn't support the coup in Bolivia. I'm like, the last coup that took place was 2000, a major one that took place 2011, Honduras, that was orchestrated by Hillary Clinton in part. So these people are not leftist in a true sense, not an old radical millennial populist socialist Bernie Sanders sense. These people are neoliberal establishmentarians who want a corporate-driven structure of gatekeeper control that leverages, that puts together a coalition of Wall Street, the defense industry complex, the surveillance state, big tech, and big media, and big business to profit the most. That's why his whole focus in his bailout is for lockdown politicians, bankrupt pension funds, and a lot of that money, where it's going? It's getting recycled right back to Wall Street. It was like when we did bailouts in the past for like during, after World War I, and we were going to help bail out the poor European governments fighting Germany. We were actually just reimbursed, like the British. We were basically writing a check to J.P. Morgan because that's who the British owed money to. Suppose we were helping the British people. The check went from the Treasury to J.P. Morgan because they had loaned the money in the first place to build those munitions in Britain. So similarly, that's what's happening here. Their whole focus, Yellen's whole focus, is on preventing GameStop populist rebellions on Wall Street, protecting Wall Street, continuing to inflate the stock bubble, to continue to keep the pension funds afloat, and then funneling money to the pension funds. And where do you think that money goes to? Right back into Wall Street.
Right back to that. Yep.
And that's why they're backing the Venezuelan coup, continually. They will be more aggressive than Trump was. I don't think Trump was ever gung-ho on it. But when you put Elliot Abrams in charge, at least it was honesty in advertising in terms of what that's about.
Right.
They're complaining about Bolivia arresting the coup leader, but she was a coup leader who tried to persecute and prosecute all of her opponents. And then the election came around. She got crushed after her coup. Of course, she belongs in prison. That's an actual coup, not like what happened on January 6th. They got Navalny in Russia trying to destabilize Russia. Navalny he's like the Lyndon LaRouche of Russian politics. He has like 1%. He's been on every side of every political issue. He gets his money from MI6 and the CIA. The guy's a complete fraud. And there's people that are unhappy in Russia, but they can only protest for like a weekend or two, and they're like, this is boring. We're going to go home. We're trying to destabilize there. So he's going to accelerate these destabilization efforts, not decelerate them. And he's even more neoliberal than the Obama administration. That's why you'll see him go back and forth on Iran. He won't necessarily go right back into bed with Iran because these people believe that America should be the hegemonic empire. So to them, it's like old Kissinger ideology, which is to exercise power solely for the purposes of exercising power. People should read the book.
Global hegemonic power, by the way. Something that's never really been achieved, ever.
No, read the book, the Shadow of Kissinger, which talks about how I didn't even fully appreciate until I read that book that he believed in continental philosophy, which is my brother used to say that's not real philosophy. He said there's analytic philosophy and then a bunch of basically mumbo jumbo, and that's what continental philosophy is. These people like to think they're philosophers. They're baristas. That's what they are. They're Starbucks baristas with little proverbs. But the Kissinger was a believer in all that gibberish.
Yeah.
And so he believed in power for its own sake. You create your own reality. Subjective reality is a reality. There is no objective truth. That's what all the kind of nonsense they believe in. But he believed that, and this is what this neoliberal regime believes in, down deep. They believe in exercising power solely for the sake of power. That's why you see ideological incoherence in their foreign policy. 1 minute pro-Iran, the next minute against Iran. 1 minute pro-Saudi Arabia, the next minute against Saudi Arabia. 1 minute they're going to stay out of Yemen, the next minute they're going to double down on Yemen. They don't know because their whole point is power. You prove to the world how powerful you are by simply exercising power. Regardless, you have no political philosophy. You have no overarching strategy.
Yeah, that's what I keep trying to explain to people. That's what I keep trying to explain to people because the needs are changing. So they don't. There's the ideology is not really firm in any issue or any region, whether it's foreign policy or even domestic policy, because the needs of the state are constantly changing. The power of the state, right? They're constantly changing because the world changes, events around us change, our environment changes. You can't have an objective truth. You can't believe. You have to be a relativist, basically, and just be all over the map. It doesn't matter. One day you're here, one day you're there. It's the same thing, Robert, with why they can look at us straight in the face 2 months ago and tell us that signature verification is not needed. And then 2 months later, try to strike a 750,000 signatures, right? Out of 2 million, because their needs have changed now. So now their mind changes. We're going to topple Assad, or we're not going to topple Assad, right? So we're going to topple Assad, but maybe it's in our interest today to do so. We want to get rid of him for the sake of, exerting influence in the region. But you know what? That humanitarian crisis, we're not going to topple. I mean, it's just like whatever. But they have more in common with each other, even domestically, than they do with anybody on the populist right. Because they just believe in that they're pretty much simpatico on that. That's why Bill Kristol's daddy, all decades and decades ago, was a lefty, folks. He was a lefty. He
They're
was basically a domestic commie who believed in power, in the power of military. That's it. I mean, that's where neocons came. They were never conservative. They were always more liberal. Oh, not liberal. That's
Sure.
the bad
Well,
word.
especially if you read, like,
the word liberal.
You read a book like Gary Will's Nixon Agonistes, they're not true conservatives because they don't wish to conserve anything. And what is Trump exposed it. Trump exposed who the David Frenches really were, the Bill Crystals really were,
Major
this whole
fraud.
crowd, Max Boot, that these people don't care about. And Nixon Agonistes probably does the best way of describing this. These are people who down deep are utopians, down deep are radicals, down deep don't believe in tradition, down deep don't believe in conservative values as by any measurement. If we were looking at Burke's works right behind me, they're not Burkean conservatives in any meaningful way. I don't even think they understand it if they could try. And that's why they were all people. The neocons and the neoliberals are much closer in alignment than probably any other two political groups because they're also statist at heart.
Big
that
time.
way of describing them as neo-fascist, but the way I'd like to describe them is they're statist. They believe in the state. And what's unusual about this is they believe in the state so much that they do things just to prove the value or power of the state. Not the state to redistribute wealth, not the state, not to achieve any particular purpose, but just the state for the sake of the state. And that's why they're going to assert power just for the sake of power, whether it's domestically or in foreign policy. And it will be the only thematic unity in any of their strategic and tactical choices. And it makes it scary because that's how you get into a lot of really stupid wars in foreign policy.
Yep.
And it makes it risky domestically because it's how you suppress civil liberties and it's how you sink an economy by believing the state can do things it just can't do and function and maintain either constitutional liberty or maintain a sound economy. And so I think that will get exposed over time. But Biden's basically already in big trouble, and I don't see how he bails himself out. The professional class is the other problem for him is the media and the social media Democratic class is so dominated by the professional class that that they're not getting the warning signs they should. And the only warning signs are coming up in their polling. And Biden admitted people, they're polling every single day. They're going to be polling obsessed people. Clinton's people were.
Democrats are. Yeah,
Democrats are. Clinton's people were. Obama's people were. They want polls every night, 24 hours. Boom, boom, boom. Because they sort of like in TV ratings, YouTube, social media. All of this has reinforced that. How many likes did I get? How many retweets did I get? How many views did I get? That's how this whole generation of young professional class neoliberals have grown up. And so they want reaffirmation. And what they're seeing is constant, continuous slippage in public opinion. The two groups he needed to win, the working class Democratic base, and make inroads into the working class Trumpian support, he's getting nowhere with either. And so that's in fact, he's losing ground, and particularly with his own working class base. And right now he's set up for just a disaster for 2022. That's why he gave that Carter malaise speech of maybe you'll get to have a barbecue on July 4th. And think about the mindset.
Yeah, he's trying to lower
all those little speech writers thought this will be such a great moment. So on July 4th, everybody will get to have a backyard barbecue. Not realizing half the country thinks they're nuts to even be suggesting that idea. There's a great meme of, usually you had to come and take it with a gun. It was a come and take it with a barbecue.
Barbecue.
Yeah, just come and take my barbecue. Try to get it. Try to get my barbecue. I'm going to barbecue whatever chicken I want this weekend. These people are so out of touch because they sit there and they listen to things like Pod Saves America. I remember the first time I ever saw that nitwit was on one of those TV shows. And when I saw his shoes, I was like, this guy has no clue about the real world. This guy has, his idea of slumming is, visiting a high-end cafe in someplace in the South. This guy is, not legit, but that's who's informing these young liberal professional class people. And I think right now that speech last week was a desperate speech. It was, crap, the roof is falling in. And it's because none of them couldn't see it coming. None of them understand their own electorate. None of them really understand the mindset mentality of the country. And consequently, when they see these poll results they get terrified. And they're like, well, what worked before? Orange man bad, pandemic. And don't worry, we're really rescuing you, believing in the gaslight version of the world. And that's where their problem is. They see their public opinion polling issues. They don't realize part of the problem is the gaslighting has failed. People are no longer believing, particularly in the working class communities, this gaslight narrative about the pandemic for the last year. They're starting to realize it was a hoax in terms of the degree of the threat and the necessity of the lockdowns all along.
Yeah, they have no self-awareness, Robert. We saw this with Cuomo, too, over the weekend. He puts out this chart. The chart is from March of last year to March of this year, because now here we are again in the mid-March, right? Coming up on a year of this now. And he puts out this chart which shows, that the curve flattens, goes down, right? And then comes back up. I'm like, do you realize if you put a plot ban on the mask mandate, right, you would see that you imposed mask mandates and the infections kept going up. Are you unaware that you put up a chart that basically renders your last 5 tweets pointless, right? Because mask up, care about your neighbor. Mask up, care about your... None of that was supported in the charts that he put up, but they just return to what they think works, right? So this worked for them, and they're going to keep going back. Almost nothing Joe Biden said in that speech was true. Almost, or he basically fabricated who deserved credit. The Johnson & Johnson deal. That was done under Trump. What are you talking about? Right? I mean, it's incredible that he made, thanks to my administration. What? You did nothing nothing on that. I mean, it's going forward as was designed by the prior administration. He got an email after his speech from the office of the 45th. All right. And it was just one of those really Trump digs, I hope everybody remembers that everything he said, I get the credit for that. Do you remember that? Yeah. I was like, this is so Trump. I mean, he's like, basically everything Joe Biden just said is good. I did for you. And I hope you know that. It was epic, right? But that's,
that's
it's true. But it was true.
George Samueli and Peter Lavelle were talking about on the show, The Gaggle, which I recommend to everybody. Good independent perspective.
A great show.
They were pointing out that really that Biden's election was probably one of the most demagogic of all time. That what he ran, to blame Trump for a virus is by itself insane. That's never. I don't believe that's ever been done in political history anywhere that I know of. That someone blamed a politician for the existence of a virus. Completely. And then to also complain that somehow Trump sunk the economy when it was Democratic governors who sunk the economy. And he's hoping to maintain that dual level of demagoguery. The problem is this was always going to be an issue that we talked about from the get-go, which was maintaining the lie that this pandemic was a Black Plague level threat that required these extraordinary, unprecedented things that we didn't even do during the Black Plague, and shutting down the economy, civil society, lifestyle, isolating people, leading to all the problems that we predicted would occur. That at some point, when people didn't see everybody around them dropping dead, they were going to go, I'm not so sure about this. And that's the problem. For people under 65, excess deaths have not increased at all in any meaningful manner. They're about on par with expectations. So once that happened over a year, being able to continue to push lockdown, scare, fear, only your professional class losers, your overeducated losers, we're still going to be all proud of that. The people going around saying, I got my second shot. Everybody celebrate.
I know. I'm such a virtuous person.
They're putting a tattoo of a loser tattoo right on their forehead. Look at me, I'm a loser. Not even knowing that. In terms of that. So I think and particularly in working class communities, the only community to continue to buy all of this is the professional class community. That's the only people that have stuck with him. The problem for him is they are his entire echo chamber that big tech is enhancing by excluding so many other people. So increasingly now, 2/3 of the voices heard are just big professional class liberals on Twitter, on Facebook, that are showing up in Google searches, that are showing up on YouTube searches. And what that's doing is that's making them more divorced from reality, which they are only understanding is a problem because of their polling, but they don't understand why, and they don't understand how to fix it because of their little echo chamber that's totally disconnected from the real world.
And look at the New York Times article over the weekend about education. First, starts out with the polls being horrible on whether or not parents want their children back in school. It's now becoming overwhelming. I told everybody, you and I talked about this 10 months ago, that it may certain women in certain areas may be a problem come November, but beyond all of this, this is going to be, whoever's on the right side of this is going to benefit. And now they're looking at these polls, they're cratering with these people. And the New York Times writes in the article, they have the Biden administration on their side. I don't know, like you said, it's an echo chamber, because in reality, if more information was getting around, in reality, there's no way they would be allowed to push that as the truth. This bill had this new, whatever you want to call it, COVID relief bill being, it's not. I mean, when less than 10% of a bill is devoted to the actual topic, then you can't really label it that, accurately. But the bottom line is the money, the $126 billion plus, Robert, devoted to education, 8 months left in this fiscal year, and less than 5% of that is even allowed to be spent on this. The bottom line is Trump already funded the states. There was 2 or 3 analysis. By now, I think it's 3. CDC did one. An independent group did one. The states were given enough money to implement the CDC guidelines to reopen schools, fully reopen them this year, and they didn't do it. And if there were more information channels, they would, it's dangerous to close yourself off like this, because parents know the New York Times is full of what. I mean, they know it. The bottom line is you can't tell yourself a lie over and over again, even if you believe it, right? So even if the suburbs in DC and in Fairfax County and in Loudoun County, even if those people believe it, the rest of America is well aware that their children are going to school 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, every, maybe something, if you have multiple children, some go in different. I mean, we have friends and neighbors dumping their kids in private schools now. I mean, they're ponying up the money for private schools. I mean, that's what most people are doing.
And I think long term, the amount of harm done over the next 10, 20 years when it gets accredited correctly will far exceed the number of preventable deaths that occurred from the pandemic itself, and the harm. I mean, but also the other thing that we talked about is there's these people who seem to believe that you can just suspend a year of time and it have no lasting psychological effect, no lasting effect on children's education, no lasting effect on employment, no lasting effect on small businesses. Like I was watching. We've been nice to them, but I'm not going to be nice to them anymore. To the show The Rising on the Hill. And I mean, Crystal Ball, who, is about as politically savvy as the Crystal Ball from UVA.
I told her they were wrong. Yeah. I went on that show. I was nice about it, but I'm like, you're in for a real shock. Surprise. They bought into
my view is that they're too much like Joe Rogan. It's probably why Rogan promotes him. They were all wrong on the pandemic. They were wrong on the polls. They were wrong on the election. And they're wrong on their forecasting now. And in particular, and what I mean by wrong on the election, I mean in terms of the election legal issues that came up about it. They were very dismissive and the rest. But one of Sagar's predictions was that Biden was going to be immensely popular because the economy was just going to take off. And it's like you got to start reading and real independent. So if you're going to pretend to be a populist, start reading some populist sources. Sagar, Crystal. It's embarrassing. Some of their. I quit watching because it was just so. If their intellect was a pool, it goes 2 feet deep, and they still might drown in it. So that's the nature of where they're at. And part of their analysis of the economy, it's like I was talking with George Gammon about this. It doesn't. The idea that you can just come in and sort of psychologically, physically, and in a lot of other ways, basically do fatal damage for a period of time to large parts of the economy in our society, and it have no effect in a year. And instead, everybody's saving up money just so they can go back to those stores and buy again right away. And there's going to be this massive surge of spending that also magically won't cause inflation. Don't worry about that either.
I know, somehow. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Does not make sense. That this experiment that we've engaged in, I think we're going to discover something totally different economically than what a lot of these people are predicted. I think we've created a real bubble in Wall Street. We're creating a bubble on in the real estate world because it isn't underlying sustainable. Many of these businesses that have been wiped out are done. They are not coming back. The idea that you can just take a year off from your small business when it operates like restaurants and a lot of places 3 to 5% margins already, and you can just come back and magically everything be fine, makes no sense. Nor does it measure, and this was my debate with Will Chamberlain and others from the get-go, my argument was the more you highlighted the fear, the longer-term damage you did. It wasn't like they thought, well, if you highlight the fear, people will feel comfortable and re-engage in the economy again. It's like, that's not going to happen. It's going to be the opposite. Like here in Nevada and Las Vegas, they're starting to believe the convention business may never come back, ever, to the scale that it was before. So the probabilities, even in places, you can see this in states that are open. Even in states that are open, you see still below average attendance of restaurants, movie theaters, places that are crowded, because we've created so much fear that a certain percentage of the population is going to change the way they live forever. And the way and so at least 10 to 20% will, right. And that's going to have lasting effects. And that doesn't even deal with the crime problem or a lot of other problems that are out there, issues with currency, issues with how that's being managed and maintained. So there's all these. I don't think we're going to have this beautiful booming economy in summer that's going to last for a year, year and a half without any adverse consequences. I see that as the less probable outcome than what the working class is already telling people in the public opinion polling and by a range of other conduct, that they have long-term concerns now about where the world is going, because we've terrified too many people in such a way that and we destroyed too many businesses. You can't get back a lost year of labor. You can't get it back. It's not like you can do twice as much labor the next year. You can't get back a lost year of education.
Production
it's not like you can do twice as much.
Yes, you're right. You're going to do twice as much education next year. What was it? The American Association of Pediatricians, or American Association of Pediatrics, whatever. 3% at least of their wealth is vaporized already, gone, never coming back. If they're lucky, they learned about a third of what they would have learned in a normal school year. They will learn this year. That's it. That's just this year, by the way. That says nothing about the school year that we essentially canceled last year. You'll never get back some of these social development skills that come with graduating from high school, from, going into high school the next year for a first year. That is not coming back. End of story. And then you cannot break supply lines, Robert, and expect, like you said, these tiny little margins that some of these companies have been operating on for years. There's that woman. She was her and her daughter. She's basically famous around here. She runs some like Jamaican cuisine thing, right? But it was very hole in the wall. She's gone. One of the best down in Moorhead. One of the best restaurants. People park their boats on the dock and get up and go in the restaurant. It's like a wharf restaurant, right? Destroyed. I mean, the place is destroyed. That's not coming back because Joe Biden signed a $1,400 for individual stimulus. This is a joke, this idea. And some of these people, you can't. Well, like you said, we've been nice. Probably stop. It's probably time to stop being nice. Even the survey of consumers, you look at the comments from Richard Curtin. Well, they expect a stimulus payment, and that should help. It has never helped. There has never been evidence that a single stimulus payment has had long-lasting impacts on the economy. You cannot undo what we've done with a $1,400 check or even a $4,000 check. These were what Trump did. Was create, or really he allowed us to do it. That's the genius of a president who understands the economy. You just get the hell out of the way. You make sure you don't have barriers that hurt people. You make sure the playing field is level and fair. You do your best to do it. And then you get out of the way and you let Americans take over, and they will largely do that job for you. Under Trump, that labor market was real. That demand for labor was real. The only reason wages went up last month is because we saw the evaporation of some of the jobs we're discussing right now, some of those businesses. And when you take out those businesses, then you just change the equation. There's the professional Zoomer class is still, getting their paycheck, but working Americans aren't. So you're reducing those wages and salaries from the equation. It artificially pushes up that wage growth 12-month number. That's all that's going on here. The Bureau of Labor Statistics flatly says it. In their employment situation report every month, wages are distorted due to extreme changes in the labor market. In other words, don't believe this is 4.5% wage growth, because it's not. That's what they mean.
You look at shadow stats. You look at the number of people receiving some form of unemployment assistance of some kind, or assistance of some kind. That number is still extremely high. So that's where the official, U3 number is nowhere near what the real unemployment number is. One of the better ways to measure it is to look at all the people that are receiving support in order to get by.
Yeah.
Here's another way.
Pandemic assistance.
George Gavin did a great job of showing this, that if you looked at just the private economy has dramatically shrunk. And it's the only reason why GDP was only down slightly was because of the massive amount of just printing cash. That the government share, I think, was something like 54, 55%.
Yeah.
The GDP, it was one of the highest it's ever been. And this is all just printing money. Just print. And the idea this will have no consequence. Put it this way, if writing checks solved problems, the Soviet Union would still be successful. You can't just write checks without creating things.
It's not sustainable, Robert. You have to have the private sector drive the public sector. This is not a matter. The public sector doesn't create anything, folks. It doesn't create, it doesn't build, it doesn't produce wealth, it doesn't produce. That's what people really are having a hard time grasping. Under Trump, all of these indicators, but under Trump, that housing market we had a housing crisis, so it kind of does make sense, but it was the last to come back. We were looking at manufacturing, we were looking at all these other sectors, and they were coming back and booming, but that, we called it the four-cylinder. Housing, we were not really running on all four cylinders. And it was showing at the end of 2019, before the pandemic, it was showing that housing was coming back. Builder confidence started to soar to unprecedented levels. The pandemic came, it blipped for like a month, but housing starts, building permits, right? New home sales, all of this came back and was going to roar. Unfortunately, they waited that 2-month period. I think the election was uncertain for a lot of Americans, regardless of what the media's attempt to just move forward. There were a lot of Americans holding out to see whether or not Trump could pull, basically something out of a hat. But consumer sentiment, consumer confidence, small business confidence index, the National Federation of Independent Builders, their housing market index, all of these indicators have tanked now. And it is not because of the pandemic. They blipped during the pandemic and started to return or surpass pre-pandemic levels. It is because of the inauguration of Joe Biden. And people made some moves in this last month or so that I'm with you on this. You're not going to see that going forward. And that last jobs report was not good. It wasn't great. 350 is nothing. We needed to add extreme numbers to recoup the damage, to recover from the damage we did to ourselves. And I just don't see it, Robert, when you have small businesses and now ADP, mid-size and large businesses saying the same thing. If the CapEx is down, there's not going to be growth. I don't care what anybody says. No CapEx, no growth. That's how it works.
Well, and I think the other thing is they underestimated where Scott Adams was right in particularly was that Trump's expectations game, his mindset, helped boost the economy as well.
It did.
He helped create construction enthusiasm. He helped create other forms of economic enthusiasm just by the nature of his constant, continuous promotion. And the Biden is this sort of negative Nancy, Jimmy Carter malaise. For the people that don't know, go back and watch famous speech. Carter did this, America's in this psychological moment of malaise during the stagflation rise in the oil problems of the late 1970s that became definition of who Carter was. And Biden is of the same. It struck me as a Carter malaise type speech.
The dark winner. It's the dark winner.
And it's like, if I was watching that speech or get the highlights from it, do I go out and start a business right now? Do I go out and think about new economic activity? Do I go out and try to build a house? Or do I stay a heck away from all those things because I'm not even sure if I'm going to get to do a picnic in my backyard on July 4th, 4 months from now? So that's why it was a very bad mindset speech. These are people who believe in centralized planning, and they think they can just gaslight the world into behaving in a certain way. There is no history of centralized planning having lasting success economically, ever.
Never, no,
it's the ultimate psychological test of the success of the state. It fails without fail every time, over time, no matter what the system and circumstance or situation might be, whether it's fascism or communism or any other form of totalitarianism. And so it's inevitable and inescapable. And that's why I don't think that mindset can unleash economic. I think what you're going to have is you have people that are permanently handicapped. In other words, once you cut off their leg, they're not going to be able to run the same way ever again. And they've done that to certain degrees psychologically to our children. They've done it to the whole population in the sense of drug problems and other mental health problems that just don't get cured overnight, that were helped created by the lockdown, and the economic lasting damage. We had businesses that are open for 150 years shut down, and they're just not coming back. And the idea they're all going to flood coming back, that there's going to be new businesses ready to step into the gap right away. Would you be gung-ho to step in the gap when you have people like Fauci saying maybe in 2 years we have to do this again whenever the next pandemic comes? I mean, they're creating a mindset of fear, and a mindset of fear suppresses economic activity. So I don't think we're going to have this big explosion of economic activity come summer. And even if we somehow did, I don't think we can get it without the consequence of inflation, particularly consumer price inflation. That's the most harmful. So
there's
and we may get the worst of both. George
Gammon
Gammon may be right. We may get stagflation. We may get the worst of both worlds. We may get bad inflation and a bad economy.
Yeah, Robert, the business impact survey, whatever it's called, the census created it after the pandemic to basically measure the negative impact the pandemic has had on your business. And after Joe Biden's speech, I mean, it was doing, of course, the numbers were horrible in the beginning. I mean, it was like this thing was being released at the height of the lockdowns, but it was improving. And after Biden's speech, it was back to like 38%, extremely negative. After it fell in the 20s under Trump, it fell in the 20s. Now, at one time, it was almost universally negative because, of course, the question is very simple. How is the COVID pandemic impacting your business? And it's extremely negative, very negative, negative, somewhat negative, kind of thing. And when you're at that 4 in 10 mark of people saying extremely, that I don't really see how you could possibly expect an environment, not only of businesses flourishing, but you need constant business creation to create and hold on to a dynamic economy that meets the needs of a changing society. Entrepreneurship really does. Trump, you said it, you put it really well, because Trump's the best he offered this country is that he was a cheerleader. He was a cheerleader. You can see it in every damn survey, from the National Manufacturing Survey across the board. He made businesses and individuals feel good about themselves. That's what he did. And that you really can't measure how much of an impact that's going to have. And by the way, Songar, you better go back 55 years now since we've been studying and publishing these numbers on People's Pundit Daily. I mean, not 55 since we've been doing it. We have 55 years of data in the developed world on this. If he rolls back, he'll sell it as a tax hike for only wealthy Americans, and he'll try to sell it in a very populist light. But the fact of the matter is, many, many, many Americans are individuals filing. They have LLCs, they have S corps, right? And they will hurt that tax bracket. And that's where the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, this is a talking point, Robert. Oh, we're going to get the $10 trillion back from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The CBO never scores correctly. Their job is to keep the construct at its status quo. They will, any bold reform, they will try to squash with some BS scoring. They admitted they were wrong in their own budget outlook on their most recent one. It came out, and not only did the TCJA not increase the deficit, it shrunk it, or it didn't shrink it. It contributed more revenue, which helped to offset growing shortfalls in Social Security, Medicare, and by the way, Republicans, defense spending. Okay, that is the driver. Those are the primary drivers. The tax cut led to more economic growth, which led to rising revenues to the Treasury, which helped to offset some of those rising shortfalls. That is a talking point. And if Joe Biden removes that tax bracket, he's going to put individuals who file their taxes through H&R Block, there's a ton of them, and they employ a lot of people. He's going to move them out of the Goldilocks zone, because it is. A lot of libertarians don't want to hear this, but there is a Goldilocks zone. You can lower corporate taxes. You can lower, taxes on the rich too low, and then it does have a negative impact. There's a Goldilocks zone. It's 15 to 23, I think. It's on PPD. I can't remember everything, but that is the Goldilocks zone. And if Joe Biden's proposal puts it a couple of percentage right out on the high end of the Goldilocks zone, which will lead, according to, I'm telling you, 55 years, rising wages were attributed in large part to that tax cut. You kill that tax cut, Robert. You pull those corporate tax rates back, the wealthy, you roll that back, and you will hurt wage growth. You'll go back to Obama. I think we were being generous in our projection. We said it would hurt wage growth by about a third. We may have been generous. Honestly, that may turn out to be too generous. We'll have to see the details of his plan.
My hunch politically is he won't go at corporate rates because of the international complexities.
I hope not.
Because even had Hillary won, I believe that the corporate tax reform that Trump put in would have still passed because of the problem of international, that U.S. corporate tax rates were much higher than the West on average for corporations. And so they were using transfer pricing to not have to pay U.S. tax, period. And so the solution was, hey, if you bring back your cash. Now, Trump thought the quid pro quo was, if you bring back your cash, you reinvest it here, not just buy back your own stock. Unfortunately, that's what they did. A lot of the latter.
A lot of them did.
But they had to just to normalize relationships. I don't think because the U.S. will only lift corporate tax rates when the West does. And right now, it doesn't look like Europe's going to either. So if Europe doesn't, instead, it's going to hit the high end. I think it'll hit two groups. One, high end income earners, people, small business people who make money off their own labor or their own enterprise.
Yep.
And then second, I think the big one they're going to change, and it'll be interesting to see how this filters through, but I think they're going to start taxing capital gains at the same rate as ordinary income. And that's going to create they're going to recreate the tax shelter industry that took off the last time Democrats did this in the early 90s. And so we'll see if and I think they'll try to do a wealth tax. That's unconstitutional in my view.
Yeah, me too.
And in many legal
lawyer,
scholars' view, but I think they're going to test it. They're going to probably do like 1%, something like that. But I don't know if they really have the guts to pull the trigger on a Wall Street transactions tax. And I don't know if they have the guts to fully pull the trigger on a capital gains increase. So that's what I'm curious about. That will show you how much the new left has power versus the neoliberals on the economic side. I think he'll end up just focusing. I think he will lift the capital gains rate, but maybe not all the way. But I think he'll start out of the gate by proposing that. I also think the way they may tax wealth out of the gate is to tax unrealized capital gains. And those gains that you have in your stock, but you haven't sold yet. Gains that you have in your house, but you haven't sold yet. But there's so many economic ramifications and implications for that the devil will definitely be in the details. He's definitely going to do a major tax increase proposal, and that too. But you're right. That is going to be another economically suppressive event, not an economic takeoff event. There's very few examples of higher tax rates leading to economic takeoff. And a lot of people look to the economic tax rates from the 1950s And they would be right
Eisenhower,
about, corporations used to pay a lot more in taxes. The practical reality, whatever you think about corporate tax rates, is that the international transfer pricing and the international global economy makes it impossible to tax corporate income except at a universal rate across the West. If your rate is not in line with the rest of the West, then they won't pay that tax anyway. So it doesn't matter what you do on the rate, they won't pay it. At least the sophisticated ones. All you'll do is you'll hit the very companies that pay the most, that produce the most domestically. The companies that cannot, your 8-figure companies that provide services and goods in the United States that cannot easily do transfer pricing. They don't have lawyers that set up, captive insurance and the double Dutch and the double Irish.
That's right.
All of that jazz. There's a lot of ways to legally avoid paying a lot of tax. But most people that are in that middle zone of not having enough money to really afford a good tax plan, but making almost all of their money domestically, are the ones that are going to get shellacked. And the reason for it is because Democrats see that as mostly a Republican audience. They're also, you can almost guarantee he's going to jack up taxes on energy. He's going to find ways to go after the energy industry, call it a Green New Deal plan or whatever. He's going to almost have to. And it's probably going to be in part because those young professional class political consultants are going to look to AOC as the way to get back millennial support that they're losing.
Yes, they are.
Millennial enthusiasm, especially, that they're losing, which would be a big 2022 problem. And so because they have such small margins in this House, and of course, literally no margin, it's dead even in the Senate. And they're already in trouble at a wide range of levels just preliminarily. So I think their economic policies, if he's smart, he'll focus more on the minimum wage and on infrastructure, because those are two politically popular proposals. What happens to them economically is in debate, but they're less clearly negative than tax increases will be. Less clearly economically and politically controversial than going after the energy industry will be, when he's already done that. He's already partially done it. Does he want to kill it? It wouldn't surprise me. I think a lot of Democrats do want to kill it, and that may be their global solution. Their rent control proposals are dead. Omar is trying to propose a new one. It's not constitutional. The courts just struck down the CDC's effort to try to regulate impose rent control and prohibit evictions. Not going to work as a health extension. So I think there are legal limitations to it. But all of that's a good bridge to the other big political ramifications, which are what happens in the George Floyd murder Chauvin trial. I think also could have political fallout no matter which way the verdict goes. Because I think
Robert,
you're
a lawyer. Let me ask you something about that. All right.
Yeah.
Today, the Derek Chauvin's attorneys asked for a continuance or postponement because of the city's settlement. How the hell? I always thought years ago they weren't allowed to have a civil settlement until the criminal case, parallel criminal case or related, was resolved. Why the hell? I mean, this is big business for people who don't know. The Crumps, the Parks, they have extorted many states out of a lot of money. We took them on in Florida because when Charlie Crist was the cowardly governor of Florida, he would constantly cave. He gave Crumps and Parks millions and millions of dollars for cases that were not really litigated yet. How the hell can you allow, or can the justice system allow these settlements before criminal trials proceed? It poisons everything, Robert. How is that allowed? Is there not any precedent? A court. I'm talking about rulings. That's obviously. I'm not a lawyer. You don't have to be to see that is that obviously puts the defendant at a disadvantage. I mean, one juror, I think it was 36, was dismissed today because of that. She flatly said, "I can't make an impartial thing." I just gave him money.
Well, I think, did you see the USA Today poll on the Floyd case nationwide?
Oh, yes, I did. Very damn.
It was interesting. I mean, one is that only 36% of the country is now convinced that it was murder. And there were major differences by age, race, and political alignment. And if you look at who leaned towards acquittal, or skeptical of whether it was murder. Well, a couple things. One was almost 20% of the country reported no opinion. Now, probably some of those are lying, but some of those who just don't want to give their opinion. But some of them, I suspect, haven't researched it much. And what it shows is that if contrasting it to what's been happening at the trial, which is every juror has been exposed to it, and all but one has watched the videotape. And almost all of them lean towards, by the nature of their statements, lean towards Chauvin being guilty, which shows that Minneapolis, the combination of social media and rioting in the same jurisdiction concerning a single case means that there's too much taint in the jury pool. It doesn't seem to me you can ever get a fair jury in that circumstance. We'll probably see that potential issue play out in a case I'm involved in, the Rittenhouse case, and potentially some other cases, because that's a major problem. In my view, the judge should have recognized by the end of last week, after talking to enough jurors and seeing the response to the juror questionnaire, that he had to at least expand the jury pool. It could not all be from Hennepin County and Minneapolis. You know why the Attorney General wanted it that way. You look at who is a profile for convicting, and it's liberal Democrats, and Minneapolis is the capital of liberal Democrats in the state of Minnesota. I mean, what was it that Biden won Hennepin by? Was it like 70 points or something?
Yeah, it's like 68 points.
Yeah, wow.
So,
That gives people, there's almost no Republicans in the county. And the few that were outed themselves by saying they would be worried about what would happen to them if they voted, if they participated in the trial. And the only reason for someone to worry about that is if they were thinking about the possibility of acquittal, because they're not worried about, they know they're going to get celebratory parades if they vote guilty. And I'm sure that one juror, one of the first jurors on the jury, who said she was all excited to be on the jury, it's like, oh, and she's a millennial. She
reminded me of Strawberry Shortcake from the Scott Peterson trial. That's who she wanted on that jury bad. She wanted to punish Scott for her own baggage.
I strike every juror who wants to be on the juror. Never. I made the mistake years ago of letting a juror on because they fit other good traits, who said they were really excited to be on the jury. Total disaster. They are pro-authority jurors, whether it's corporations, the government, whomever. They're not going to be pro-individual cop. They're going to do what authority wants them to do, what's going to make them a hero. They can't wait to be photographed afterwards. They can't wait to be in the media afterwards. They can't wait to write a book afterwards. There's no way that person all excited to be on the jury is thinking about voting for acquittal. There's zero chance of that.
There's one juror I like so far. I'm not even kidding, Robert. There's one juror that I like for the defense. There's one.
I agree. I mean, I think it's with the. I think they added 2 today so far. I think right now it's 6-3 for guilty. And my rule of thumb is, based on a wide range of research that's been done, if there's 8 leaning guilty, it will come back guilty because the other 4 won't hold out. And I don't think any of these 4, I'll have to look at one of them that picked today, but so far, of the 3 that I think are truly willing to give Chauvin a fair trial, though they don't think they lean toward Chauvin, but of those, I don't think any of them are holdout jurors. Holdout jurors are rare. They have to be incredibly stubborn, very iconic personalities. None of these are. Yeah. So right now it's heading towards conviction. Now I think politically, so one is, how polling data could be useful. Trial lawyers need to start doing this more whole scale. Not only do mock trials, do focus groups, but do polling to test the community. Which demographics align with certain biases, which attitudes are the most consequential for being able to fairly interpret the case. All of those dynamics are critical because they're very educated. It showed us that I think they could have had a better argument for transfer of venue if they would have produced lots of polling data. Lots of data that showed here's how the deep saturation of bias. Get some psychologists to opine, get some experts to opine about the nature of motivated reasoning, how this kind of bias is going to lead to this kind of outcome. Particularly attack the presumption of innocence. Say that there's not enough jurors in this community that can meaningfully enforce the presumption of innocence because of their exposure to pretrial publicity and their pre-oriented attitudes on this subject. It's clear that he's not going to get, in my view, a fair jury. And it's not possible to get a fair jury in Minneapolis, despite the yeoman efforts the judge has made to give the best voir dire I've ever seen to try to filter out bias. They all lean towards guilt. But part of that was just demographics. You had an overwhelmingly liberal Democratic jurisdiction. And on these questions in this political environment, they always lean guilty already, as the USA Today poll, Reuters poll, it was USA Today and Ipsos.
Ipsos, they
confirmed.
basically took the Reuters pollsters' data. I mean, this is what I was saying this last week on Inside the Numbers. I mean, it's double dipping. They're double dipping, man. They're doing basically what YouGov is doing with The Economist and with others, Robert. I mean, it's the same damn data set. Let's be real. They're getting paid 2 times for the same collection, essentially. I mean, that's just true. And I'm sure they took that data and gave it to somebody else as well. I don't understand, though. I mean, so I guess there's nothing. There has never been any rulings, though, or there's never been any legal precedent that would prohibit these cities from reaching settlement deals, civil settlements. No.
They can reach it at any time. Usually, what happens is the civil. Usually, the reason why almost nobody ever sees it is usually the civil case is stayed legally while the criminal case is going on. But my guess is, because, for example, Chauvin couldn't agree to the settlement. So it must have been that this would be smart of Ben Crump. He may have not sued Chauvin or the cops. He may have said he was only going to sue the city on a Monell claim. By doing it that way, the city still could have stayed the case, because they would have said, we need the testimony of these witnesses. There's a pending criminal case, parallel proceeding. They can assert Fifth Amendment rights. We need a stay, and usually courts grant a stay. But that's why, by the way, that's why you almost never see this. But it's not because there's a legal prohibition on it. There's just a de facto inability to get a settlement, because usually there's a legal stay in place. Now, this is a payoff. This is a political payoff. This $27 million
what this is
a ridiculous.
Absolutely.
95% of jurors would have given less than $1 million, even if they found in Floyd favor. That's reality. Right. Even in Minneapolis, you could say maybe that's 80% would have gone that right. The probability. Now you have your attorney's fees, which in a complicated case can be another $1 million, can even be up to $2 million. But you're not going to get to $27 million,
Robert.
Especially not in Floyd's case. There are people that have been burned to death, literally burned to death by people who set them on fire through their own gross negligence, who got less than half that. So this is an insane sum of money. But it's not. It's more money than the Minneapolis Police Department will spend for the next 3 years combined on their entire police department. That's how much money it is. And so it's nuts. It's a political payoff. And this is the deal. Ben Crump hustles a race narrative that the media loves, that the Democrats love.
He's a grifter.
And they give him millions of dollars of taxpayer money in return.
Yep. That's right. Thank you, Robert, for laying that out, because that is what it was been years now. And then this is why we push so hard with the Trayvon Martin case. Same thing. Here they come again. And Charlie Crist years ago, he knew the grift, but he just kept doing it. And this is what Robert is saying, that these guys, they're grifters. They are essentially dirtbags who come in and get their media friends, these ideologues and these hive mind, hacks, to push their stories, to get massive attention in the media, to raise awareness, to make, and I don't mean this in any other way but the truth, George Floyd's life was not going to produce $27 million, all right? So, Robert, if I was killed and my wife wanted to, some kind of compensation by somebody who killed me, she would argue, look, Rich would have made this much money if you didn't take him away from us. George Floyd was not contributing anything to society at all. Let's be real. It's just true. But that's not the game. The grifters come in, they pump it up until a civil rights issue. The Democrats and the white liberal who is involved in this scam gets what they want, which is police reform and all these other virtue signals. They get what they want out of the deal. They extort governments, city and state governments, and they get filthy rich off of it. They get the amount of money these dirtbags have taken from Florida alone. It was like $8 million by the time my head went up, and that was low. That was nothing as of now, because they've been allowed to do it for years since nationwide. Right? They took that grift nationwide.
Well, and in many of these cases, Crump's been smart. he doesn't need to. They don't need to extort anybody because the politicians are in on it.
They're in on it now, Robert.
Yeah, absolutely. And Breonna Taylor, Louisville, gave a ridiculous sum of money. So the goal is, hey, we're going to come in and do a hustle. We'll play the script in the way that helps you in your criminal case, that helps you in your political arguments, that helps the Democratic Party writ large. And you just agreed to enrich us as part of the deal. I'll make sure the family sticks on a certain script. I'll make sure the whole case sticks on a certain script. And I'll make sure it aligns with your political interest and objective. And as long as it does, you make sure, Trump's probably going to get $9 million payout on the Floyd case. After what, a $3 to $4 million payout likely on the Breonna Taylor case. This is absurd sums of money that most plaintiffs' lawyers never sniff in their lives.
And this from what you've done in the past, real civil rights cases, Robert.
I set a record in Milwaukee, and it was a little over $2 million. That was the record in Milwaukee, highest settlement ever.
Jury will give you.
Had to go all the way to trial to get it. And that was a case of a real abuse case. They treated that person in jail like he was you poll tested it. You saw the video.
That's what I'm saying.
Like a garbage bag. That was a real abusive case. That was a case where he could have produced money for his real work life expectancy of wages. He hadn't spent his time in and out of jail and prison his whole life like Floyd had. He hadn't been a criminal from the time he was a kid like Floyd had. He hadn't, put a gun to a woman's stomach like Floyd had.
A pregnant woman.
Well, apparently that part I haven't been able to confirm.
Is that not confirmed? Okay,
that's not confirmed. But either way, it's a gun to a woman's stomach. Real man. There's no
real
moral.
Man.
The other thing is, and he had a habit of doing this, and he was doing every drug known to man, obviously. Now I still think Chauvin mishandled the situation. But I don't think, and I think they had a civil rights case because I think Chauvin should have flipped him over about 3 to 4 minutes in and I don't like that particular method of neck hold. I've never liked it for a range of reasons, but I don't think Chauvin set out to kill him. And the case is just not a $27 million case. On the high end, it's a $1 million case, maybe $2 million
case, Robert. You know it, and
at the most. And that's only because I think Minneapolis screwed up by not giving proper training about that particular method that Chauvin used. They should have highlighted more as soon as you get control or as soon as you see a sign of physical distress, turn him to his side.
And this is what the medical examiner, I want to read this real quick. Can I read this real quick? This is what I got. I got this from Jack, just to give him credit. This is what the Hennepin County medical examiner conducted his autopsy on May 26, 2020. Okay. And they're fine. I'm going to read the last paragraph first because, like we said, whether or not Chauvin should have rolled him over. Here is why they come to the conclusion they did, which is, by the way, damning to the prosecution. Very damning. I know which route, and so do you, they're going to go because of the law on that charge. You don't have to be the only contributing factor to the death. You just have to be one of. And that's the narrow little path they're going to try to walk with a biased jury to get them to some ridiculous verdict. But the full report of the ME is pending. But the medical examiner has made the following prelim findings. They've known this since May of 2020. The autopsy revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Mr. Floyd had underlying health conditions, including coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease. The combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police, that's what they're going to walk, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system contributed to his death. All right, so they didn't, at this point, we didn't know the fentanyl and methamphetamines that were in his system. All right, because I believe it was like meth and fentanyl combo or something, right?
Well,
something
I think
that, but a ton
they call it a goofball.
A goofball, yeah, that's right.
And before somebody comments the threat, say, "Oh, you don't know what a speedball is." This is different than a speedball. A goofball is separate from a speedball.
It's new age, man. A speedball is old age.
Well, and it's clear he had this pattern of ingesting drugs as soon as he was arrested, so that they didn't have to have the drugs on him. He'd done it just a year before. Now all that evidence is not coming in, but they have evidence, slow-mo video here, and that he had something on his tongue that may have been fentanyl right when he was getting arrested. That's what and that sudden ingestion of that many drugs after he's got a poor heart already and and other problems related to that. The being able to exclude that as the cause of death is going to be a big issue at the trial. But I see that as separate. I don't think that I think there's reasonable doubt that Chauvin caused the death of Floyd. That's separate from whether Chauvin and the city of Minneapolis did everything they should have done correctly.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I told, and it is legally too, you're saying, right? I mean, really, I mean, there's a difference between being guilty of these offenses and then having, kind of conducted yourself differently. And the medical examiner said this is why, look, again, no physical findings support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. And this is where they go back and they rely on this.
There was no damage here. There was no damage.
Yeah, they're referencing.
It should have been.
That's right. There was no damage.
The knee wasn't really quite on the neck. It was in a certain position and his head was turned so that there wasn't the pressure on it. And that was consistent to Chauvin's training. The only thing that wasn't consistent is it did say to flip him over once he was safely contained. And Chauvin probably went 3 to 4 minutes past that time. That's Chauvin's biggest risk at trial.
And this is this is what the medical examiner cites. It's real quick. It says the officer said, and he's just referring to Chauvin, right? Because he says, I can't breathe. And he said, you are talking fine. And he continued to move back and forth. And their medical examiner is saying, he doesn't look like he can't breathe. He's still moving. He's not complying even as he's in this, at least in the beginning. And then Officer Lane says, should we roll him on his side? And Chauvin said, no, staying put where we've got him. Officer Lane says, I am worried about excited delirium or whatever. And then Chauvin replies, that's why we have him on his stomach. None of the three officers moved from their positions, the medical examiner just notes. The BWC, the body camera, shows Mr. Floyd continued to move and breathe. This is what the medical examiner of Hennepin County said. At 8:24:24, Mr. Floyd stops moving. At 8:25, and this is where what you're saying comes into play and why I do agree with you. He could have done this differently. At 8:25:31, the video appears to show Mr. Floyd ceasing to breathe or speak, and Officer Lane says, want to roll him on his side. And I don't know how to say his name. Kung checked Mr. Floyd's wrist for a pulse and said, I couldn't find one. He says this, you can see it, right? None of the officers moved from their positions. Robert, almost 2 full minutes later, the defendant removed his knee from Mr. Floyd's neck. An ambulance and emergency medical personnel arrived. The officer placed Mr. Floyd on a gurney, and the ambulance left the scene. Mr. Floyd was pronounced dead at the Hennepin County Medical Center. Now, here's the thing, though. From 8:25:31 to 8:27:24, what the medical examiner is saying is it doesn't appear he is choking or asphyxiating him. Between those 2 minutes, he drops dead of something. And this is a prelim. They don't know yet about the ridiculous levels of drugs in his system. They don't know this. So at first glance, you have to think that this person is under extreme pressure already. We know the national attention is under extreme pressure to say, yeah, it looks like Chauvin killed him, put his knee on his neck. But they're not saying that, Robert. To me, that speaks a lot. That speaks volumes.
Well, and part of Chauvin's defense will be, particularly as a subjective intent, will be that this was the method that he was trained, that they had used it hundreds of times over the past 10 years in Minneapolis, that about 1 out of 5 times the person would pass out, and that was expected to be a risk, but not that it would ever cause death because it never had, to their knowledge, before. So that when he thinks he's just passed out, and he's like, okay, everything's cool, they'll be here in a minute, no problem. Now, and so that's in his defense. The other interesting factor here is the violation of the policy may have been the last 2 minutes, which is after Floyd's not moving or talking, not turning him over. However, I think the big problem the state has is I think he was already dead.
That's what it sounds like to me, Robert. I'm with you.
Yeah, flipping him over to the 100%. Side wouldn't have done anything. Because by the time, in other words, they were only able to contain him, and he wasn't trying to resist or anything else once he died. So the fact that they should have flipped him over doesn't matter. It doesn't impact anything if he was already dead. And so that's the big legal problem is, do they have – so even if the state can show for 2 minutes they failed to even follow their custom and training of flipping him over, the flip side is the defense can say he was already dead.
Matter?
He just died suddenly.
Yeah.
There was nothing we could have done anyway at that point. And there was no reason to necessarily, well, they can only kind of say that. They should have checked the risk quicker. But that's where they were negligent in how they handled it. But it's not clear that they either had the intent of reckless homicide or that it actually caused the death. I think a fair jury, depending on how the evidence develops, but if it's what I just said, a fair jury would acquit him across the board. Now but I think an unfair jury will convict across the board. I think either way, political problems, political fallout from this verdict. Because if they convict him across the board, it's going to scare cops all across the country. They're going to not want to enforce the law, period, if it involves any degree of risk. So not only will they not use this restraint, they'll try to avoid almost all restraints and interaction.
Yeah.
And Heather McDonald's research has shown what that does. Crime surges, just like it did in the late 1960s, early 1970s. When the police back off, crime goes way up. And that's just a functional reality of the situation. So that's one political fallout risk. The opposite political fallout risk is if it's complete acquittals, we may see another round of riots, another round of all kinds of, Biden may use that as a pretext for some other crazy policy. And so we'll see how but I think there could be political fallout either way. If it comes back a mixed verdict, that might limit the scale of political fallout. If they acquit on the top 2 counts and convict him on second-degree manslaughter, because he was willing to plead guilty to third-degree murder before the case even started. So if he gets convicted of second-degree manslaughter, he's got tax problems he's got to deal with. That he'll end up doing the same amount of time or maybe even less time that he already agreed to cut a deal for. So that the key is winning on the second and third-degree murder charges from his defense perspective. I think the best outcome for the country would probably be a split verdict. I think the legally correct outcome is probably acquittals, unless there's different evidence than what I know of right now.
Yeah, they already are preparing for, riots. The problem with these mob rule situations, Robert, if they don't fry him, and I mean fry him across the board, there's going to be a problem. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a split. This is mob rule. That's what happens when you cave to the mob. It won't be good enough for them. It won't. And they're going to flip the hell out, man. That's what's going to happen. It's sad. And then the long-lasting impact, as you were saying that, Laura shot me the message. We saw that under Obama, even periodically. And by the way, Heather's book, The Diversity Delusion, is fantastic. I have a signed copy from her. It's fantastic. I'm a data nerd. If you're a data nerd, she's right up there, guys. I mean, really, she's fantastic. And then that pushes that political, and speaking of, that's a relevant book for what we're talking about. All of this is supposed to be in support. What do the politicians get out of this? And the truth is, it's in support of that false narrative that there's some genocide of black men in our police are engaged in a genocide against black men in inner cities across this country. It's simply not true. It's false.
The Floyd story at so many levels is revelatory. And the Floyd trial will be revelatory of how good our criminal justice system can handle a case of this nature as well. Mm-hmm. So the criminal justice system is as much on trial as anything else. Now, Ellison, Mr. Antifa himself, is doing everything, hiring private guns and private prosecutors, hired guns to come in and try to railroad them. They want a biased jury. They want inflammatory evidence. They want improper instructions. They want overcharging. They're all of the abuse that can take place in a prosecutor's case so far they've employed. And my guess is they'll employ more. There'll probably be some false testimony, some fraudulent testimony, some hidden records that will come out after the trial because they're.
Did you hear what Alan Dershowitz said?
And Dershowitz agreed with me. This was complete overcharging. Good that the second-degree murder has no place, third-degree murder has no place, but the Minnesota Court of Appeals politically wants to greenlight this. The Minnesota Supreme Court is like our U.S. Supreme Court. They're all hiding under their desks. All of these courts are usually in or around Minneapolis, so that's another problem. It's like the D.C. Capitol Hill cases, where you have judges who cannot be fair by the very nature of where the case is being held and the nature of the accusations, and that will be political fallout there. Now, the political fallout there is a little bit different because the problem is they've got judges that are mostly in their pocket. They got jurors that are ready to lynch them. Their problem is they got no evidence. And that's why even though they've locked these people up, their evidence is so limited, they're begging the courts to violate speedy trial rights after violating bail rights, after violating Fourth Amendment rights, after violating due process rights, after violating First Amendment rights. They're now going to violate speedy trial rights so they can gum up some evidence because they can't find any for their big theory that this was some grand conspiracy, some insurrection, some coup. Yeah. It turns out it was none of those things. That it turned out what we said it was from the beginning, that a small group of people rioted, and you can go to watch my hush-hush version for the stuff we can't talk about here at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, and where you can get the insight on a wide range of topics and subjects like that. But what we said from the get-go is proven true. And it's unfortunate there's the federal public defenders are stepping up to the plate. Some private lawyers are. Hopefully more will, because this is an egregious abuse of civil rights and civil liberties, while the clueless Biden administration, while they're trying to lock up their political enemies, trying to create anti-terrorism legislation to target their political opponents, are lecturing Bolivia and Russia about how they're treating actual criminals in their countries.
Incredible.
It's just the lack of objectivity, the lack of clarity is striking, but it's what's defining the Biden administration. And like what he's doing on the Floyd case in terms of his political allies, like what he's doing on the economy, like what he's doing and what he's trying to do overseas, it's reckless at every stage, and he seems to be clueless at how reckless it is.
Well put, my friend. Well put. Coming up on the hour here, guys. We're wrapping up another episode. Yeah, just to get what specifically what Alan Dershowitz said, what Professor Dershowitz said, that Keith Ellison is a bad person, but he's a dangerous person. I do not trust him to carry out justice in this case. Wow. I mean, that's like he's going to hide evidence. He's going to engage in the most egregious examples of prosecutorial misconduct. He's not a good dude. And his son is across town working with BLM and Antifa to basically burn the city to the ground when they don't get the verdict they want. I mean, this is crazy. It's extortion it's like domestic terrorism or something. I don't know. I mean,
it's what real domestic terrorism looks like. Not a couple of people busting windows at the Capitol. Kind. Real domestic terrorism is when you hijack a community to extort a jury, extort the local community into giving them what they want politically. That's real. That's the definition of terrorism. Of course, they're not going to be labeled that because Chris Wray is too busy chasing down the last racist in his basement to worry about what's happening in Minneapolis.
The last Trump supporter in the Justice Department. I mean, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's it. I'm going to uncover you. I'm going to find you. You can't run forever. Basically, poor woman, she's her nephew was gunned down in the autonomous zone, not last weekend, but a couple of days before, and police couldn't even get in there because they're not allowed in there.
This is the George Floyd autonomous zone.
Yes, the George Floyd autonomous zone, which in her words is not protest environment. It is militant in nature. And her, they don't know that he could have survived. She's not saying they know that. She's just saying what we don't know is whether or not he could have survived. What we do know is that the police could not get in there to render him assistance, and he lied dead on the street
who right now would be a Minneapolis cop if Chauvin gets convicted across
the hell?
I mean, you almost have to be semi-insane to be a Minneapolis police officer watching this. I mean, you should retire or
get burned down.
Find someplace else to move. I mean, you've got an unduly dangerous job at this point.
That's so true. All right, Robert, repeat it again. Where can they find you? That last video, by the way, with you and Viva was great. You were talking about George Floyd, too, in that case. I watched that today, earlier before the show. Go ahead. Tell people where they can find you, where they can follow you.
Yeah, so we have a place that's censor-free and troll-free where we provide exclusive content. I want to promote the platform, which is locals.com. Our particular page is vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Do a range of book reviews, film reviews, hush-hush series that gets to the kind of information you can't talk about on big tech anymore. A deep state series that starts this week about the idea of the deep state and its strategy. There's some people that will make some cameos in that over time that are currently in positions of power. and we'll get to some of that. But that's where you can go to have fun, have commentary, have exclusive insight, and have a place where all of our everything's going to be archived and protected from censors or suppressors alike. So vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You can go to Richard's also has a locals page you can join. And it's a good place of conversation and a place independent. You need an exit ramp for big tech, and the first exit ramp is locals.com.
For sure. Couldn't have put it better. All right, it's all about HR1 on Inside the Numbers on Wednesday, so don't miss it. Robert and I will be back for What Are the Odds next Monday at 2 p.m., folks. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel right now. Before you leave, hit that notification bell, and that will let you know when we're going to go live. Also, if you're on Facebook Live, like the page, People's Pundit Daily, because we are trying to beat that puppy up. But like Robert said, if you want a troll-free and censor-free platform, you got to go to our locals page, peoplespundit.locals.com. And they will, Robert, they're going to have their own live soon. I was told by them a couple of days ago that it was cool if I talked about it. It's coming. It's complicated, but it's coming. And then it will be really, an autonomous community, which would be it will be fantastic. But we will see you guys next week for What Are the Odds, and we'll see you on Wednesday for Inside the Numbers. Thanks, Robert. See you soon, my friend. Be well.
Adios.